Welcome to Teaching Truth. When I was a small boy, I lived in and went to school in Motherwell, home for many years to the famous Ravenscraig Steelworks. The steelworks, which once stood at Ravenscraig, operated round the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, without pause, for decades. The iconic blue cooling towers of Ravenscraig were a bastion of central Scotland's landscape, and the steelworks pulled in generation after generation of school leavers and kept them for life. Visit Ravenscraig today and it consists of green fields, a country park and modern new housing. You'd hardly know there had been any industrial activity there at all. Visit the desert in which the tabernacle was constructed in the days of Moses, and you would not find any trace of it there at all. The tabernacle, the dwelling place of God, was portable. It belonged to a nomadic people, a people who, with Moses, were on a journey towards the promised land. And in our reflections today, we briefly want to think about the position of the tabernacle, which was constructed in the days of Moses. The tabernacle faced east. And what rises in the east? Well, the sun rises in the east, and therefore the tabernacle faced towards the sunrise. Right at the centre, right at the heart of the tabernacle, was the most holy of holies, the inner sanctum, if you like, where the high priest was only permitted to enter. The Lord was right at the centre of the tabernacle. Everything in the tabernacle, the furniture, pointed towards the Lord. And the positioning of the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies, was right at the centre of the tabernacle. Jesus ought to be at the centre of our tabernacle. Jesus ought to be the one who we focus our worship on. Everything tends towards him, just as everything in the tabernacle of old tended towards God himself. See, the tabernacle was the focal point of Israel's community and life. Everything revolved around life, as it were, revolved around the tabernacle. The position of the tabernacle was not just strategic, but it was also spiritual. The different tribes dwelt around the four sides of the tabernacle. We read that in Numbers chapter 2. On the east side of the tabernacle were 186,000 people from the tribes of Issachar, Judah, and Zebulun. On the north side, there were 157,000 people from the tribes of Asher, Dan, and Naphtali. On the west side were 108,100 people from the tribes of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Benjamin. And on the south side were 151,000 400 people from the tribes of Simeon, Reuben, and Gad. Now, if you just add up those figures, there were an awful lot of people. And they were placed on all four sides of the tabernacle. And add to them all the animals and the entourage that came with them, and the children as well. And the number of people therefore encamped around the tabernacle, the centre point of life, was probably, it is estimated, between 2.5 and 3 million. If the people had travelled 50 abreast, it's estimated that the procession would have stretched for round about 40 miles. The Israelite nation was a huge one, figuratively speaking. Were you to fly over the tabernacle, and it was not possible in those days, but even if you were to climb a mountain in the desert and look down on the tabernacle, the way the camps were set out around the tabernacle would have formed the shape of a cross. The way the camps were set out around the tabernacle would have formed the shape of a cross. And isn't that interesting? That right at the centre of the tabernacle, right at the centre of the cross, was God himself. And right at the centre of the cross was Jesus. And therefore the tabernacle was a visual representation of not only what was, but what was to come. The position of the tabernacle, which hugely significant. Life revolved around the tabernacle. Life revolved around the worship of God. And the way the camps were set up formed the shape of a cross. The position of the tabernacle was not insignificant, but it was significant and spiritual. Does my life, does your life revolve not so much around the tabernacle, not so much around the church, but the one who is at the centre of the tabernacle, the most holy one? Does our life revolve around the one who is at the centre of the cross, Jesus Christ himself? Join me tomorrow in Teaching Truth as we conclude our reflections this week in looking at the importance of the tabernacle to Moses and the Israelite people, and the relevance of the tabernacle for you and I in 2023.